So we have with us today Courtney Milan. She writes books about carriages, corsets, and smartwatches. Her books have received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Booklist. She is a New York Times and USA Bestselling author, and we get to talk to her about romance novels today. So Courtney, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much. You are in Mountain Time, so I really appreciate that you are around dinner time and instead you're talking to us. So thank you.
That's fine. I usually eat later anyways, and it gives me an excuse to make my husband make dinner.
Yay, good job.
Exactly.
So just to dive right in, can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Like, how do you start from your first idea, your little inkling of a book, until that last line? How does that work for you?
So I think there's multiple stages in my writing process, and it differs for every book, unfortunately. Every single time I have a book that writes really easily, I'm always like, I figured it out. I'm perfect from here on out. And then the next book starts. So generally what happens is my books have a really long gestation period. I will get ideas and it won't be like a fully formed book. It'd be like, something like a girl who's a sea urchin diver, right? And then I have like all of these things sort of like swimming around in my head, like the sea urchin diver, and then somebody else does this, and then somebody else does this. And eventually I sort of like have like one idea that sort of brings them all together, and I'm really making this up off the top of my head, something like, heist to steal something. And I'm like, oh, who would want to steal this? It's that person I've had in the back of my head for ages. And the person who I think needs to be with him is this other person I have. And so suddenly all these ideas, like these partially formed ideas that I've had in my head, they stick together and they start rolling. And once they start rolling, they start acquiring more and more ideas. And at some point I have this little ball that's been rolling through my subconscious for 6 or 7 years. And I reach down and I pick it up and I'm like, okay, it's time to write this guy. And then if things go really, if the universe loves me, then I know what the first scene is and I can write the first scene, and then I know what the second scene is, I can write the second scene, and we can continue all the way to the end with minor deviations as I realize things don't work. But if the universe doesn't love me, and mostly the universe doesn't, then what happens is I know like the scene that happens in the middle of the book, and I don't know what comes before and I don't know what comes after. So I'll just write the scene in the middle of the book without context. And usually when I write that scene, I'm like, how could this possibly work out for anyone, right? Like, in order to get into this place, then this must have happened before. And so then I have this idea for this other scene that's like right here, and I write this scene. I'm like, well, if I write this scene, once I write that one, I'm like, okay, wait a second. So I introduce like a bunch of characters in here and they're angry at each other. So I'm going to write this resolution that's like over here. And so after about like 20 disconnected scenes, then I'm like, okay, I got to take a step back. And I take a step back and I like figure out where all the scenes fit and what the story has to be that connects them all. And some of the scenes that I write at that point just don't make it into the book. Just because it's just, okay, this isn't part of the story. It's just like these two characters like just talking about random stuff, which isn't really a book. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. So then so then I somehow get this first draft, and then I have to go through and make it look like I planned it that way from the beginning. And that takes like 2 to 3 to 4 drafts until I feel like I've smoothed it out into something that feels like a real book. So yeah, that's the process. I don't advise it. Don't do it that way. If you can write a book from start to finish, you should do that. My process sucks.
I mean, from the outside, it sounds amazing, but I could understand why it would make you very tired if you're actually the person doing it.
It's more keeping everything in my head. And then it sort of feels like, in Indiana Jones, when he has those steps across the chasm that he has to take, and it looks illusionarily like there's no bridge.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it feels like every time I start writing a book. I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I just know that I have this one scene and I'm hoping it's connected to a whole book. And so far it's been connected to a whole book 95% of the time.
That's great.
It has been not sometimes.
those scenes that you end up not using, do they ever end up in other stories, or are they just sort of in that drawer?
Yeah, they're just in that drawer. I mean,
Okay.
I know people who reuse scenes, but it just, I've never felt like it works because you'd have to have two characters that were very similar.
Sure, that makes sense.
I don't know. And most of the time, like if I really love something about it, I would have kept it. I would have found a way to keep it in the book. Like I've kept scenes that are just solely like, does this really move the plot forward? I'm not sure, but I like it. And I know that sometimes people are like, you should kill your darlings, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you do that when you need to, which
Yeah.
So can I ask you a little bit about creating your characters? You mentioned they sort of pop up into your head. Do you ever go looking for them, or do they really, or all of them just sort of creeping around in there?
No, it depends. Sometimes I have characters and the moment I conceive of them, I know how they talk, I know what they do, I know how they would respond to things, and it just comes instantly. And other characters, it's like, sometimes I'll have like, sometimes you have characters and you think you know who they are, but the dynamic that they have with the other characters in the book is not working. And so I have to sit down and be like, what's not working about this? And then just sort of go through. It's like, okay, so is this the thing that's not working? Let me try that. No, it still isn't working. And then at some point I hit on like the exact right thing I need to give that character. And suddenly the character writes. Whereas before it's just like me putting stuff down and not really feeling it.
Have there been any characters that you just loved working with them, or any that just made you super mad when you were working them out on page?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in terms of characters that I super love, I have some favorites. I love Chloe and Jeremy from The Duke Who Didn't. I really love Amelia, who is the heroine from The Devil Comes Courting, which is my latest book. I love Smite a lot, who is one of my older characters, but he's just so screwed up in like just the most right ways. He was so much fun to write. I really love from the Countess Conspiracy, Violet. Violet and Sebastian. Violet is also really screwed up in different ways, and Sebastian is screwed up, but they're just together. There's so much. They were fun, and it was a delight. So there are some characters that I like writing more than others. In terms of characters that make me mad, usually if they make me mad in a bad way, I can't write them. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like I've written secondary characters who I think were intended for readers to not like. And that can actually be really fun because then you're sort of like constructing someone and you're like, what would a person like this do? And like, you think about all the people you know who have been like that and you're like, that is exactly what that, this is a library talk, so I don't know if I'm allowed to use.
Yes, you are.
But,
it's okay. This is an adult program.
Okay, but it's like, that is exactly what that bitch would do, and like when you get it just right and like that kind of person, that person you've worked with before, and you're like, that is it. I have captured that essence of like supreme bitchiness that this person embodies. That's just such a joyous feeling. And I don't like the character. And if I had to work with them, it would make me mad. But actually like writing it is delightful. It's very cathartic.
I love that. So your books are incredibly researched. If anybody here has not read a Courtney Milan book, one of the things you always have to make sure you do is look at the author note because they're incredible. Can you talk a little bit about your research process? Are there particular resources you go to? How do you do that?
So in terms of resources I go to, there's a couple that I use fairly regularly. One of them is period newspapers. And before I start writing a book, if it's set in Britain, there's something called the British Newspaper Archive. And you can pay a set fee per month or per, whatever period to access newspaper articles. And they go back way, way back. It has almost every newspaper that was ever produced in Britain. And so one of the things I like doing is just going and getting like you know, and the newspapers then were not as long as the ones now. So we're talking 4 pages or so, and half of them half of those are ads, which are also fun to read for different reasons. But I like reading a month or so of papers around the time when the book is supposed to be written. And one of the reasons I like doing that is, first of all, it gives you an idea of what people were doing, what people were thinking, what people were worried about, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the country, what sort of things you see showing up in the newspaper. So it sort of grounds me in the period and the place. You can do that for things not set in England as well. It takes a little bit longer and a little more research because there isn't a single archive for the entire world the way there is for Britain, unfortunately. So that's one of the first places I start. I also lean very heavily on Google Books as a start because they have a lot of older set books written in the 19th century, 20th century. And I always find that period resources are in some ways, a little more useful than non-period resources, like stuff that's written now. There are times when you have to use things that are written now to get like the overview, but I always like seeing what people are saying about stuff in the time period, because I think that the way they describe it, the way they think about it, whether they think it's good or bad, who thinks it's good, who thinks it's bad, tells you a lot about society and how they process it. I also think that there's a tendency for people nowadays to, when they write about something, to think that to impose more of a monolithic view on society than has ever existed. So you'll have people say, people back then didn't like X. And that is true. There were some people back then who didn't like X, but it's just like today. I mean, imagine someone trying to figure out what 2021 looks like by reading and figuring out what the rules of society were by reading like Slate columns or, am I the asshole columns? And they'd be like, back then people, no, like these are largely aberrant behaviors. And so knowing how things work, they're A, largely aberrant, and B, if someone's getting advice on it, it's because it's happening. Right. So there's a lot of different things that go on. So I don't like using resources that have gone through and like looked at like etiquette books or stuff like that, because I feel like etiquette books don't really tell you what people are doing or aren't doing. And also, like, we don't really follow etiquette books. And I don't think that people always did then. It would depend on social class and who your mom was and all sorts of things. So that's kind of where I come from. I try and use a lot of primary sources, or at least primary is not the right word to use, because newspapers aren't generally primary sources, but a lot of period sources is probably what I should have said.
I love that. So you have self-published all of your books, correct?
No, I traditionally published my first 4 books and a novella through Harlequin.
Oh, okay.
And then after that, I started self-publishing.
And is that for you? Has that been the more pleasing situation?
Yes, by a lot, in multiple ways. I can go into that. Do you want me to?
That would be lovely.
Why
Yeah.
I prefer it. So for me personally, there's a couple of reasons why I feel it works. One is that I have control over where and what and how I write. So if I want to write a book that's not set in England, I can do that. If I want to write a book that has certain kinds of characters, I can do that. I don't have anyone that's going to tell me, well, you have to do this because your readers are going to expect it based on your prior books. I can write what I want. And, if it does impact my sales, it only affects myself, and I'm the only one who has to worry about it. So there's that. I also feel like I have more control over the final product. When I was with Harlequin, I was actually with one of their single title arms called HQN, and I didn't really like the covers they gave to me, especially for my first 2 books, especially for my second book. If any of you have ever seen the original cover for that book, it was like this dude, so this woman is lying on a bed. You can't really see her. She's just completely passive. And there's this guy who's like just looking straight at the reader. Like, it's very off-putting. And I can see how it would work for somebody who's writing like a book in which the guy's like super alpha or something like that. And this is like a depressed hero who had clinical level depression. And it super did not work for that book. So I'm much happier with the packaging. I feel like since I know what's going into the book, I like being able to control the back cover copy, the cover, all that sort of thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about your covers. I I love your covers, and they very much are. I can recognize a Courtney Milan cover when I see one.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of talk about how you came up with that? Was that your design? How do you work with the? Are they the models who pose for the picture? How does that all work?
So it's going to depend on the cover. I have about 50% stock photos and 50% photo shoot covers at this point. When it's a photo shoot, I work with the photographer on casting. She sends me all the casting, and I choose the models, and she sends me, we can't really, like, I don't know how this is going to work in pandemic times. I'm hoping that I don't need a cover again until we're out of this.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. But she sends me all the information. Like she'll send me like the shots as they're coming through, so I can see what's going on and make sure that we've got the right shot. And I'll say things like, "I don't like this pose. I want you to switch to something like stop making them clutch so much fabric." That sort of, it's like all the weird stuff. And then so that's how we get. I'm very involved in the cover shoot process when we have a cover shoot. In terms of stock photos, when I did use stock photos, and it's going to be harder and harder as I use fewer and fewer white people. It's just hard to get stock photos for non-white people that are going to work, especially if you're doing couples on the cover, and then you have to get two, and then it has to be the right two. It's a mess. So but when I did stock photos, I would just go through, before I would find one, I would go through probably 1,000 photos that I would look at and get, maybe, out of those 1,000 that I would look at, I would probably make comp images for 10 and then try and figure out which one I like the best. But like, it has to be, the thing is, have tried working with graphic designers before, and I am so incredibly anal that it's just not fair. And I would be like, okay, change it to like a slightly lighter orange, not that light. No, no. Okay, I didn't like the orange. We're not doing orange. And you do that over and over and over and back and forth. And I was putting in as much work as if I was doing the cover myself, and I was annoying someone in the process and paying money. So at this point, I do all my covers myself. I don't generally advise that people do this unless you have experience doing graphic design type stuff. And that was just one of the random things I had in my past, that I had done graphic design before and knew like the basic principles of it. So yeah, that's the long answer is I'm a very bad control freak. And so I do try and come up with covers that I feel like look like something I've done. And because I'm doing them myself, I think that a lot of other covers, I mean, this isn't entirely fair because some people do have a distinctive look as well, but I feel like a lot of other covers, if you're getting a cover made by a certain designer, you can often say, like, at least I can say, that was made by so-and-so. And I can say that because I know most of the people who are making self-published covers for historical romance authors. I can usually recognize who's doing it based on sort of like font choice and like certain other choices they do. And I think that since I'm the only one who's doing my covers, they do have a certain look.
So you mentioned that in your arsenal of abilities, you have graphic design. Can we talk a little bit about how you have many, many others also? Your background is incredible. How do those backgrounds, I believe, mathematics, chemistry, law, if I'm missing any, how do they influence your writing?
That's a great question. So I think the answer is that I bring almost everything that I have to every book that I have in some random way. So the ability to research, I think, is very useful. And that's something that I learned both in graduate school and in law school. I think I end up bringing legal or scientific plots to books a lot of the time. One of my last books was a book about building a telegraph in East Asia, and specifically building the telegraph across the Pacific Ocean. And that brought in some of like the geekiness that I had about sort of like the history of computing research that I've done, because the telegraph is sort of the very beginning of the internet. It's the point when we had electrical wires that we could use to communicate across long distances for the first time. And so a lot of the stuff that ended up being the internet really did start with the telegraph. And so I have a lot of like just being a general dork that where I consumed some of that beforehand. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things is that I'm a very inherently curious person. I like learning new things. I never got that beaten out of me in school, which I think happens to a lot of people, unfortunately. Mostly because I didn't need to pay that much attention to what they were saying. And so I've always enjoyed learning new things. And yeah, I don't know. This is just part of who I am. I don't think I could write a book where I wasn't learning something new, because I would get so bored writing it that I wouldn't be able to finish.
That's awesome. So how did you come to write romance? How was that a direction that you ended up going in, as far as what genre you were pulled to write?
That's a really great question. So I think the answer to how I came to read romance is that, when I was growing up, I had an older brother who was like, romance is dumb. And, I really looked up to him. And so I went through a phase when I was younger. I was like, romance is dumb. And then I read a romance because I was at a friend's house over, I think it was Thanksgiving, and we got snowed in and there was nowhere to go. And I always need to read. And my friend's mom had romance novels. And I was like, okay, these are here. I will read them. And so I did. And I was like, these are not dumb. And so I started reading more and more and more and more. And then I didn't stop. And I just kept going and going and going. And so by the time I got to law school, one of the things I would regularly do is I'd go to law school, I'd have a class. It would have some really complicated concepts. I have no idea what was going on. My brain would hurt from trying to figure it out. And I'd give up and I'd go and read a romance novel. And when I was done, then I would be like, oh, my brain is fresh again. And I could go back and be like, I understand what's going on now. So I just heavily relied on romance novels all throughout law school. I don't think I would have been able to do nearly as well in law school without them. That's my secret trick to getting through law school, is romance novels. I really hope this works for everyone else who tries it. But for me, it was wonderful. And then at some point after law school, I had a job working for a federal judge, and he found out I read romance novels, and he gave me this whole like sexist spiel about how romance novels are porn for women and it's like an addiction and all this stuff. And he told me that I wasn't allowed to read romance novels anymore while I was working for him. And I'm not a person who takes to other people telling me what to do really well. So I was like, well, if I can't read them, I'm going to write one. So that's how I started.
Wow. He sounds terrible, and I'm glad that
he does.
You don't do that anymore. Okay, I got 2 questions in my head. First, do you remember what that first romance novel was that you read? And if you do, would you still recommend it today?
Oh, you can't ask me. Oh, I do.
You can also say, no, I don't want to talk about that. That's okay.
No, I do remember what that first romance novel is. And I don't recommend it today. It's one of those that didn't age well. And I can tell you, I'm really sorry, because the author is still alive and she's a lovely person. But it's one of those authors that uses a racial slur for the Roma people on a regular basis.
Oh, okay. And yeah. Well, hopefully that author
there are some parts of it. There are some parts of it that I'm sure are truly lovely, but
that is fair. I feel like a lot of the romance novels we discovered early were the ones that we look back and be like, I'm glad I read that, and now I can read something that is a little bit
Yeah.
better informed today.
Yeah. You know, so unfortunately.
Do you have one that if somebody was here tonight who has never read a romance novel before, which one of yours would you recommend? And
Of
which
mine.
one of yours and one
Okay.
of another author.
Okay. So let's see. I mean, like if I really had someone here, I'd ask them what they like to read in general.
Of course.
Because, you know, it depends on whether you want science fiction or whatever. But let's see. For
if it was so
for one in general,
okay,
for one in general, I'm going to say A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole.
Excellent.
It's a delightful book. It's so funny and so smart and so heartwarming all at the same time. And it feels very, very modern, even though like oftentimes people think princess and they don't think princess. But the premise of this is this woman has been getting what she thinks are spam emails demanding that she prove her status as a princess. And she's like, whatever, delete, 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 from this African kingdom. And she's like, I don't want your spam. And it turns out they're real. And she is in fact a princess in this country. So, and so the book is about her sort of like coming to terms with where she came from, what happened with her parents, why she isn't there, dealing with the fact that she grew up in foster care because her parents had left her, and has all of the baggage that's associated with that. It's a lovely, lovely book. So I very much recommend The Princess in Theory. In terms of my books, I guess I would say The Duke Who Didn't. At this point, it's one of my earlier books, or earlier, why did I say earlier? One of my most recent books.
Yeah.
It's not yet part of a published series, although I know what's happening behind the scenes. So it's kind of standalone. So it's you're not making a huge commitment from the start that you know about. It's I think it's funny. I hate saying my own books are funny because it's like laughing at your own jokes, but other people have said it's funny, so I'm going to say
I mean,
it probably is.
I will praise this book from high heaven. Like everyone should go out and read it. You will be hungry though. Go and find some really good Chinese food to have while you're reading it.
I'm so hungry.
Oh, I can't imagine how you wrote it. Like I would have.
Oh, I was cooking all the time.
Oh, okay.
All the time. I would like write stuff and then I'd be like, okay, I have to figure out how to do this recipe right. And so I'd make it like 18 times.
And I will say it is good that Courtney Milan is telling you that there are no further books yet. Because when I got to the end, I was like, who do I get to read about next? And then I saw that I have to wait. So you have been forewarned. Sorry. I want to know who the next characters are, but I understand that might not be something that.
Oh, I can tell you that.
Oh, please do.
So Naomi, who is the Chloe's best friend at the end, Naomi Kwan is the heroine of the next book. And you have not yet met the man that she is matched with. He is in Britain studying. I would say what he's studying, but the chances that it might actually change before I release the book are non-zero. So I'm not going to say that. Trying to figure out what else I can tell you about it.
That's okay. I'm just so glad.
I will leave it there. I will leave it there because I don't want to say anything. But yes.
Earlier when you mentioned that you went and wrote that first romance novel because a terrible person was terrible. Did that book become one of the ones we can read, or is that still in a drawer somewhere?
In a drawer, belongs in a drawer. I learned a lot writing that book, and I don't need to inflict it on anyone else, but thank you.
Have there been any other genres or some, I mean, most of your books are historical, correct?
Yes, correct.
Are there any other subgenres of romance that you feel a pull towards writing, or even just any other genres in general? Would you ever write a sci-fi novel or a mystery?
I have tons of ideas in my head, and what's going to happen with them, I don't know. So here are a couple of things that I might do. Sci-fi romance. I have a sci-fi trilogy planned out. I don't know when I'm ever going to write. I'm sorry. I have a fantasy romance in which the heroine is she's a sock gremlin. And what that means is that she's the person who makes the extra socks the socks in your laundry disappear. And she manipulates chaos and entropy as a form of power and to feed off of. And she's from a very powerful family, and she's chosen to limit herself to socks because she feels like everything else is mostly unethical. Yeah, so she has it's differently ethical, I should say. And so it has a lot of the feelings of sort of like the feeling of diaspora, where it's like someone's from another culture and it's like, you are so Americanized. You have all these American ideals. You can only take socks. What's wrong with you? So yeah, I have a sock gremlin fantasy that may or may not see the light of day. I've written probably 20,000 words of my sock gremlin fantasy. It's I have a young adult series in my head about figure skating. I have something that's probably women's fiction rather than romance, that I'm not going to get into the details of because it's too complicated to explain right now. So I don't know what's going to happen with any of these books. I told you I have a really long gestation period for books. The end result of that is that at any given time, I probably have like 75 books sitting in my head, just sort of like turning over, waiting for them to become full books and for me to say, okay, time to write this one. So, yep. I wish I wrote a lot faster than I did.
No, I feel like it just means that we are going to always have more Courtney Milan books coming. So that's a good thing.
I hope so.
Yeah. So what do you do when you hit a writing wall? Or do you get to that point where you just don't know where to go next?
Yeah, so I think it happens for me for a number of different reasons. One of them is like failure to take care of myself. Like I have not slept 8 hours in the last 2 months, and suddenly I find that my brain doesn't work. And so sometimes what I have to do is just take care of myself. I also like sometimes like dopamine isn't great for me if it comes in the wrong form. Like, so sometimes I can get really stuck on random things that give me dopamine. So like the other day, I shouldn't admit this to anyone, I'm sorry. But I'm going to anyway. So the other, like a couple weeks ago, I had this issue where I found this app that was a Sudoku app. I don't really like Sudoku, but this allows you to solve them very quickly through using like a lot of little tricks that the app taught you. So it took out all the like boring like mental tabulation that's involved in Sudoku and made it so that it was just like the solving part. And the solving part of my brain, like whenever I solve something, my brain's like, dopamine, right? And so the end result is like I could do like a Sudoku every like 5 minutes or so. And this was extremely bad for my brain because then it's like, you just keep going and it's like dopamine hit after dopamine hit. And at some point you're like, I can't really stop. I don't want to admit how many Sudoku I solved. It was easily greater than 500. So we'll just leave it there. And I had to do this thing where I was just like, I deleted the app. I deleted my ability to get the app. Yeah, and then had to go for 4 or 5 days without giving my brain dopamine so that it would set itself back normal into a normal person brain instead of the I must have dopamine every 5 minutes brain.
I understand. I have my own spelling game that I'm not allowed to play anymore for that very reason. Yeah. That happens. So there's that kind of wall, and there's also the kind of wall where I just have no idea what's going to happen.
And that's a different kind of wall, because instead of like the other walls, it's like I have to back away from writing and do something else, right? Like if I haven't slept enough, then the answer is you need to go actually sleep. And that's what your priority is going to be, is to actually sleep so that your brain works properly. Whereas if I don't know what I'm writing, then what I actually need to do is not try and write words, but try and write. So I have a notebook. I use that word notebook. It's actually all digital on my iPad, with my Apple Pencil, which is the love of my life. Sorry, that came out wrong. Or right, I'm not sure. So I have an app that I write stuff in. And sometimes what I just need to do is just get in my notebook and start complaining about all the reasons it's not working. And complaining is like this really magic tool when you're writing to get over writer's block. You're like, this is terrible. This is never going to work because she won't do this and he won't do that. And there's no conflict and this makes no sense. And why wouldn't she just go and tell him and all this stuff? And you write all this stuff down. And in the fury of being mad at yourself for not being able to solve the problems, you set out exactly how bad the problems are. And once you know what the problem is, it's a lot easier to solve. And sometimes like I'm halfway through this like rant that I'm writing down and I'm like, oh, well, that's what they should do. I went wrong 2 scenes back. I had them do this and they need to do this instead. So that's kind of my thing. It's like whenever I hit writer's block in the sense of like I don't know where to go, it's usually because something's wrong with a story. And if I complain about it, I will often figure out a solution. It may not be the right solution, but it's at least a way forward. And if I do it often enough, I will break through that stupid wall.
I love that. I feel like that's something that people could use in actual everyday life too.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Are there any particular tropes that you love to write about or read about, or ones that maybe you love to read, but you do not enjoy writing, or just thoughts on tropes in general?
Well, I think it depends. So I'm pretty sure this is a trope, but like the girl who wants more is definitely a trope. And I think I always am writing someone who is looking for something bigger. She may not know what it is yet, or she may have a very specific idea, but I always am writing someone who's looking at a bigger picture and saying, I want to be a part of that. I want to make it. I want to push this. I want to do this. And I think it'd be very difficult for me to write someone who isn't. At this point in my life, I think some of my earlier books, I have people who don't, like my earliest books. But it didn't take long for me to want to write people who had big dreams, because I identify with that. I identify with seeing a world and saying, I could make this better. I could make this better if I did this. And I'm going to do it. And here's how I'm going to do it, because that's kind of how I am. Yeah, so I like writing characters who are not reactive and very proactive about what they want and what they're going to go get. I like having fun with tropes. So things that you often see, like there's only one bed. I love using things like that, but not how you expect. I think it's a lot of fun to take something that's part of a shared sort of like linguistic vocabulary or literary vocabulary and using it in an unexpected way. I think that gives me pleasure. I think it gives other people pleasure. That's sort of how I feel. I don't know. I feel like tropes exist to be stacked up in different ways. If that makes any sense.
It does. I mean, if anybody here needs another reason to read The Duke Who Didn't, the only one bed trope is used in the best way possible in there. Very surprising, and it was great. So you talked a lot about your heroines, and I wanted to ask you, what is the role or work of a Courtney Milan hero in dismantling the patriarchy?
That is a great question, and it's one that I've answered different ways. I have not been able to write a hero who is, I think, strongly invested in the patriarchy in a very long time. And it's mostly just because I don't want to. Like I think this started with the suffragette scandal, which was a book that I wrote in 2014, I think. So it's been a while, like 7 years ago. And I hit this, I wrote, when I started this book, I knew that the heroine really was going to be strongly interested in women's rights. And so like my initial idea was I'm going to put her with someone who doesn't want women's rights, and then blah, 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 blah. And I started writing this and I just hated him. I was like, who is this jerk? And why does he get this lovely heroine when he doesn't even believe she's a person at the beginning of the book? And so I had to sort of like scrap that whole idea. I was like, I don't want to write someone who doesn't think that women deserve rights. Like, I just don't. And I know that there were a lot of men at the time who didn't think that. And I don't want to write about literally any of them. Zero of them. None of them are going to get a Courtney Milan romance. And so I think the end result of this is that I don't think I can write heroes at this point who are firmly invested in the power structures of their time. I think it would be very difficult to do that. And so what are the roles in dismantling the patriarchy? You know, it's going to depend on the hero, but in general, I think a big part of it is going to be that they see power and they think to themselves, how do I give this to somebody else? How do I not keep this power for myself? How do I find ways to distribute it to other people in some fashion? And that's kind of, I think that's kind of the role that any of us have in dismantling oppressive structures, which is we see power, and instead of saying, this is my power, I get it, you people who don't have it just don't deserve it, I'm going to keep it. Then you say, I have power. What can I do? Who can I try and give part of this power to? And how am I going to do that? I think that's sort of how it works. So, yeah.
Thank you. So kind of related to that, as far as power goes, I have loved seeing how romance has become a more diverse genre. I mean, I think there still needs to be work done. What can we as readers do? Where do we go to find more diverse authors so that we can make that more?
Well, first of all, if you don't know about it, womenofcolorinromance.com keeps a list of as many women of color writing romances as the author can possibly find. And it has, like, at this point, I would wager many thousands. I haven't talked to Rebecca Weatherspoon recently about the number of books that are on there, but it's a lot. It's like, you know, she's been doing it for how many years? And she does easily 12 a week, if not more.
Wow, amazing.
All written by women of color. And they're categorized by trope, by genre, by a number of things. So I really think that that's an excellent resource if you're looking for books. Don't just look for books that's like, oh, well, this book was written by a diverse author. Like, treat it the same way. I mean, treat it the way you treat any book, and just say, do I want to read this book? Does the back cover copy interest me? Does, you know, all of that stuff. Is this the kind of thing that I read? Like, if you don't normally read science fiction romance and the first one you pick up is a woman of color and then you don't like it, don't think, I don't like women of color in romance. You just think, okay, well, I guess science fiction romance isn't for me. Right. So that's what I would say. But generally I don't know. I just think that read good books, and if you like them, then tell other people about them.
Yeah. Let's see. Are there, off topic of what we've been discussing, do you mind talking a little bit about your influence on emoticons?
Yeah. So a while back, I was texting with my friends and I realized we didn't have a T-Rex emoji. And I felt like that was a betrayal of me and probably other people in this world on a personal level, because how can you express the need to tear things apart without a T-Rex emoji? And so I asked the question, why don't we have a T-Rex emoji? And the answer I discovered after Googling, because that's the kind of person I am, is that no one had ever proposed one to the Unicode Technical Committee, which is the committee that determines what emojis are. And I looked further and I discovered that anyone can propose an emoji to the Unicode Technical Committee. And I said, well, be the change you want to be in the world. And so I proposed a I submitted a proposal entitled Jurassic Emoji, in which I suggested that they have 3 dinosaurs. No, not now. Can you just take it in the other room? Sorry. Thank you. I appreciate it. But if you leave it there, the dog's okay. Fine. Thank you. Look at him. Pele, Scoot. Okay, can you close the door too? Sorry.
Okay.
Pele, Scoot, go get him. Sorry. My husband did in fact make dinner and he brought it to me, but I can't eat it now. So, what was I saying? Oh, so I proposed a Jurassic emoji proposal and they went through and they decided they wanted dinosaurs, and except they initially thought they were only going to want 1 dinosaur, and I had to write them an email and explain. I don't know if this had any effect, for the record. I just some dude on Twitter who was part of the thing said we're talking about doing only 1 dinosaur, and so I wrote them an email. I was like, in order to communicate using dinosaurs, you need at least 1 predator and at least 1 prey, because how do you express anything? Sorry, I'm just looking at my screen. There's a little dog face. Hi, Pele.
I mean, if you follow Miss Milan on Twitter, you hear about Pele, and he's so. Can we meet him? Would that be weird?
Pele.
Hi,
Wanna say
Pele.
hi? Here. I'm gonna.
Oh, hello.
He's more interested in checking out the thing. But
That's fair.
Pele, go get him. Thank you. Okay. Don't do that. Okay, I moved my laptop and now it is crooked. And I'm trying to fix it. It's not fixed. Okay.
You could. That was entirely my fault. I got excited about a dog.
It's okay. We'll just count it as the Pele tax.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's basically it.
That's great. So we are close to being done with our hour. We do have a couple questions from audience, if that's okay, before we move on. Okay, so going back to research, somebody asked, who is the strangest or most interesting expert you have consulted for one of your books?
That is a great question, in part because I'm trying to decide. Okay. So when I was writing The Duke Who Didn't, my heroine is Hakka Chinese. And when I was reading sort of like period sources mentioned Hakka people at the time wearing earrings, and they described them as being trumpet shaped. And I'm fairly certain they were not what Hakka people would think were trumpet shaped, because there wasn't a trumpet in the culture. And so I was trying to figure out what the earrings were, if they signified anything or whatever. So I emailed like 4 separate people to see if they knew, and they were all like, no, we don't know anything about earrings. Fine. So that may be the strangest question I've ever emailed strangers. Hello, I realize I don't know you, but I would like to know about earrings. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, I think I'll go with that one.
Yeah. Somebody asked, so before you became a full-time writer, how did you make time for your writing? And was your process similar to it is now, or completely different?
Well, the answer is I had terrible insomnia for about 9 years.
Oh no.
And so I was only sleeping 3 hours a night. I don't actually think this is a good idea.
Sure.
Don't get insomnia. I wish I had something better to say, but the answer just was that I just literally wasn't sleeping appropriately, and it was destroying my health. Yay, don't do that.
Don't do that. No. We like a healthy Courtney.
I'm so sorry. This is one of those questions where people ask and I'm like, capitalism really sucks. I wish I could fix it.
Fair. And then my last live question that I have from an audience member talks about how in some of the more recent books that you've written, some of the characters spend more time apart. And we're just wondering, did the pandemic and people being close together influence that? Was that just sort of something that grew naturally? Does absence make the heart grow fonder? Is that something you thought about, or is that just sort of how it turned out?
So they do spend a lot of time apart in The Devil Comes Courting. And this is one of the things that I yelled at myself a lot in my notebook about, for the record, because the premise that gets them together is just no way for them to spend time together. I was fighting to get them together as much as I possibly could throughout the book, which is one of the reasons it takes 2 years or a year and a half. I forget exactly what the timeline is on it. It was quite long. The timeline is quite long on that book. And it's the premise of that book sort of forced them apart on a regular basis, because he is a ship's captain who is laying telegraphic line, and she is not on the ship. So that, I don't think that was the pandemic. I think it was just the book.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would have done it with them being together with the other stuff that was happening. So yeah, I guess in the Duke Who Didn't, there's time gaps implied, but from the start of the book to the end of the book, they are pretty much
together.
100% around each other nearly all the time. So I'm not sure that really fits. And then I honestly can't remember what I wrote before that.
That's okay.
So, I'm sorry. I'm just really bad at remembering my own books. Like once I finish them, then they kind of go through the memory hole. It's not on purpose. I don't think it has anything to do with the pandemic. I do think it has to do with plotting. The book I'm writing, are they spending a lot of time apart? Well, kind of, but not really. They do spend time apart, but you just don't see it. It just slides by, I hope. I'm still writing it, so I might screw it up. Sorry.
And we did have somebody who just wanted to let you know that they love your author's notes, and just thank you because of
thank you.
Getting to read the research at the end is really interesting, and I heartily agree. All right, I'm going to just ask you one more question, and then I will let you go, because I am sure you would like to have your dinner. And so you mentioned that for the most part, you sort of don't think about your books afterwards, but are there any that if you could just snap your finger and turn into a movie or a series that you would be like, this is the one to do?
I would probably do the Wedgford series at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because I feel like it has like a marketing angle that's sort of like, half Chinese town in the middle of rural Britain, which I think would be sort of like a hook that would sort of like go through the whole show, that it's about this town and sort of how things go. Yeah, let's just say that.
I mean, that's what I vote for, but again,
yeah,
I may have imprinted on that book just a little bit, having read it. So yeah, just thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Is there anything else that you would just like to say, or books that, I don't know, anything that people need to know about Courtney Milan?
I'm sorry for laughing. It still is kind of baffling to me that people want to know anything about Courtney Milan. So, I don't know. Have fun, use dinosaur emoji.
Yes. And every time you do, say, thank goodness somebody submitted it.
You don't need to thank me for them. Thank you, though.
Emma has just put into the chat our post-event survey. If you don't mind filling that out, attendees, it does really help us know how to improve things for our program. And it's always just nice for us to see later that you loved our authors who come through, because we would not be a library if we did not have our authors. So make sure you go and check out our local bookstores. You can order Courtney Milan books. For those of you who are not in St. Mary's County, I know you can get in your local bookstores too. We have her in print and in our e-library, and just go read her books. Everyone should.
Thank you.